July 29th, 1965 was a day that would go down in Swedish history, a day that is still in the record books today. And for the sleepy Nordic town of Gothenburg, it is a day that shows that sometimes life is truly stranger than fiction. Jan Olof Dalsøy is the one who would give his name to this case, and he was just 21 years old when he would go on to make this history. He was living with his mother and his two younger brothers at the time, and worked at the local docks. He was in a steady relationship, and his best friend was Guy Carlson. Guy was just a year older than Jan, but Jan was considered the more cool-headed and mature of the two. Actually, all three of the young men involved had a brief and not too deep brush with petty crime, but Guy Carlson was definitely the one more involved with a life of crime. He was known to be more gullible than the others, and often found himself in trouble with the law, sometimes influenced and swayed by the heavy drinking circles he was known to be a part of. And it was after one of these nights with these drinking circles that Guy would be in trouble once again. Just 2 months before July 29th, Guy would crash his car whilst driving under the influence, and this was perhaps an even more serious offence because he was driving without a licence. But this was a different time and a different life. Sweden, like most Nordic countries, has always had a relatively low crime rate, even with the current spike it's experiencing right now. And though Gothenburg was the port and international trade city of Sweden at the time, Guy Carlson would not get into any real trouble for the car crash. He was still considered a pretty good character regardless, and the police chose to forgive and forget rather than press charges against him. If they had pressed him with something, they maybe could have stopped the spree of burglaries Guy and his friends would be a part of that July when they were on holiday in Värmland. But this story would take a different path, and Guy and Jan would meet up with a third friend on July 29th, 1965. CO.AG Johansson was the youngest of the group by far. He was only 16 when he met up with the other two that day, but even so, he was the father of a newborn child and was getting ready to move in with the mother of his child after his oldest brother had kicked him out of his apartment when CO.AG was arrested for the second time. He worked alongside the two others on the docks, and all three men would leave behind loved ones, girlfriends, and families by the end of the day. On July 28th, the day prior, Jan Olof Dalsøy would head to work like he usually did, but he would not come home that night, not sending word to his mother to tell her that he would not be coming home, or even his reasons why. During the day of the 29th, a truck driver would stop by a local smoking spot and ask Guy Carlson to help him with a job. Guy had actually been around that smoking spot and left with the driver, coming back later that day, apparently very happy and excited about the job opportunity. They would then meet up with CO.AG Johansson, and the trio would leave a local cafe at around 3 p.m, getting into Jan's car, and then they would simply disappear. Jan had previously told his mother that he might go on a camping trip to Åsa, but it was raining that day, and CO.AG had actually told his mother that he was heading to work, even though he never showed up. All three of the men would actually be reported as missing at different times by their families, and so it took the police months to realise that they had actually gone missing together. They then came up with a theory that the three men had driven into the mountains and crashed their car into one of the rivers or bodies of water up there, but the men nor the car was ever found. This would have been the only case of a mass disappearance in Swedish history on its own, but they weren't actually the only ones to go missing that day. An 18-year-old art student from Torekov also went missing that day. His name was Hubner Lundqvist, or Hume, and he was travelling from Torekov to Lysekil, a trip which would have taken him through Gothenburg. In fact, he would actually make it to Gothenburg that day, even sending his family a postcard to tell them that all was well and not to worry, but he would never be heard from again. Theories would come out that Hume had hitched a ride with the three other men that day, and that whatever happened to them must have happened to Hume as well, but the police couldn't find any connection between the cases. Either way, with the addition of Hume, Sweden now had its first and only mass disappearance in recorded history. However, Hume's parents speculated that he headed for the seas, a theory which would partially be confirmed when two Swedish sailors remembered meeting another Swedish sailor in Singapore and then in Australia that matched Hume's description, but that didn't explain the others. Guy Carlson's sister would later go to his apartment, hoping to find her brother, but when she got there, a man she did not recognise opened the door and told her that she should go looking for Guy in the local bars. Guy's sister found the man odd and said that he seemed stressed to see her, and the tension between them would only grow when she realised that this man was wearing a sweater that she had knitted for Guy. But she would go looking for Guy in the local bars, but she went back to the apartment when she couldn't find him, and by that time the man was gone. It wouldn't be until 2009 that she would recognise the man when new high-quality images of the three men were released, and it was then that Guy's sister would tell the police that the man she'd seen that day had actually been CO.AG Johansson. But how could CO.AG be alive if they had crashed their car into a river and died? There would actually be several sightings of all three men throughout the following decades, and this would give rise to theories of what they had actually been up to that fateful day. You see, July 29th, 1965 experienced an unusual spike in crime rates, not just for the disappearance of 4 young men, but because of a very unusual bank robbery. 2 bank robbers held up a local bank, one of them dressed like a woman, complete with a wig and fake breasts, and they were only thwarted by a brave customer at the bank. He was actually a former wrestler, and he threw himself at the robber dressed like a man, catching him in the back of the neck before wrestling him on the ground. After that, accounts differ on how it exactly happened, but the bank robber shot both the wrestler and himself in the leg, and the bank robbers bolted. They were chased down the streets by bank employees and customers who followed them all the way to the river, where they began to throw rocks at the robbers, and only stopped when the robbers began to shoot back at them. Then the robbers stripped, revealing that they had been wearing scuba diving gear all along, and they jumped into the water to make their getaway. The robber, who had been dressed as a woman, swam away under the water, taking the loot with him, but the man who had been shot couldn't get very far because of his injury. He actually stayed where he was, hiding for hours under the water before sniffer dogs and the police would find him, and he was arrested. The man who had been dressed as a woman and the driver of their getaway boat were also later arrested, but it did get people asking questions. Were the robbery and the disappearances somehow connected? Had the three men been a part of the plot, or deeper involved in the criminal underworld than the police had originally suspected? Travel restrictions had also been lifted, which made it much easier to travel between the borders of all the Nordic countries. It would have been easy enough for them to make a getaway if they had been involved in a scheme which had gone wrong. In fact, Jan Olaf Dalsøy was later reportedly sighted in Rotterdam, suggesting that he had somehow made his way to Holland after that day. So who knows what really happened? Maybe all three cases are connected somehow. Maybe they have nothing to do with each other at all, but coincidentally happened on the same day, making July 29th, 1965 one of the strangest days in Swedish history. Who can say, but almost 60 years later, we're still hoping that someday we'll find out the truth.